Hello, Cross City family. Obviously, Scott and Andrew here. We wanted to do a few things for you guys. Tackle some topics of life for a church family, kind of informally in the office here in our very tight and cozy cave of video. And so we particularly want to do our first episode today of basically life to gospel, gospel to life. If really the gospel is over all things, how does it pertain to all things in life? And particularly today, we are right around the corner from voting. And so what is the connection between the gospel and voting? Is there any connection? Our world will tell you there's not, and there shouldn't be, but Christ Jesus would tell you there is, and there should be. So we're going to divide this into two categories. Number one, he's going to tackle about how it connects to the gospel. Number two, I'm going to tackle into specific texts that are influential to help you shape your thoughts as you think for the next couple of days about voting, why we do it, how we do it, etc. Andrew, connection of gospel to voting.
Yeah, I think as we begin to think about the concept of voting and how it pertains to the gospel, does God have anything to say about it? I think that we can think about it primarily in, I think, three categories of the gospel. So first, God being the creator, he created all things, and he created in such a way that overflows out of his character of who he is. So he creates with order, he creates with justice, things like common good for all of creation. Secondly, I think we can think about it in terms of us being created beings, and specifically as humans, we're created in God's image. So we're created to reflect the things about God that are true and right. Things like order, things like justice, things like the common good. So both of those things, but then we also know that, thirdly, we know that there's sin, and we know that the fall has happened. And so all of creation now is disordered. And so God, in his kindness and his mercy to all mankind, his common grace, he has instituted things like governments that are intended to bring about, in certain ways, things like order and justice and the prevailing of the common good. And we're thankful that we get to live by God's grace in a place that actually invites us to participate in God's ordained government over us, that gives us a say in what we think, according to God's character, what would be order and justice and common good. So those are three things that I would begin with. But further than that, Scott, maybe you can help us think through some main scriptures and some biblical texts that can help us shape our thoughts as we think about voting.
Maybe I can.
Good.
All right. So here's the top text that come to my mind as we think about the instructions of God, the instructions of Jesus regarding our connection to government around us. First one has to be Romans 13, 1-7. When you think about the Bible and government, that's got to be a top one in your mind, our mind. So we learn a couple things in there. The number one, God has designed government. It's called his ministers. That's what he calls governments. Pagan governments are called his ministers. But we're designed to, those are designed to actually withhold the influence of evil on this world, to be a terror, not to good, but to bad, and that God has called us to live in subjection to those governing authorities. And so that's number one, Romans chapter 13, verses 1-7. Another one comes to mind is Jeremiah 29:7, where it tells us to seek the welfare of the city. So that's the people of Israel in exile. But God told them, even though they're in exile, in enemy turf, I want you to seek the welfare of the city. So likewise, when we have an opportunity by our government that invites us into actually shaping policy and putting people in office, we want to do the things that are actually best for them. And we know what the best is because Jesus is the best and has told us the best. So we seek the welfare of our city by speaking into a government that welcomes that. Third one is 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1-2, where it tells us to pray for all people, but particularly for kings and all who are in high places. And so we're not supposed to be detached from our rulers. We're supposed to care for them. I think of Daniel. Back in the day, he was kidnapped by Nebuchadnezzar. And just to watch his heart in that, his heart for the king that is violent and a kidnapper of him, and how he embraces that king's welfare. Luke chapter 6, verse 35 tells us to love our enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to ungrateful and the evil ones. And in a parallel way, Acts 14:17, it says, he did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with good food and gladness. And so God is a testimony of himself to around our world by providing good for them, good of land, good of seasons. And for us, we really want the best for our neighbors because we want that best to testify of the heart of our Creator and our Redeemer. Then finally, Philippians 2, verse 15 says that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. And so we're not called to blend in with our society. We're called to be truthful like Christ is truthful and to shine like lights. So, brothers and sisters, there's a few texts dealing with the connection between who King Jesus is and this opportunity to vote. The design of government, our role in it, in being a part of a government that invites our voice into it. So we want to represent Jesus. We want to go to the polling booths and to vote as Jesus would vote, as representatives of his. So use wisdom in that, be biblically accurate, learn things. That's what we believe, that God's called us all to vote in terms of life. But other elements get a little more tricky sometimes, right? And so walk with the Lord, get the mind of Christ in your hearts and minds, and let's do our part in bringing the grace of God, the common good grace of God, to the world around us as we vote. That is life to the gospel and gospel life in voting. Thanks.
Amen.